Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another excellent show for you today. Good morning, Briahna.
Good morning, Robby.
It's like we're celebrating St. Patrick's Day 4 days late, I guess.
I guess that's right. Did you ever do the thing in like elementary school or middle school where if you weren't wearing green, you deserved a pinch? You got a pinch?
What?
Yeah, it was kind of like, punch buggy, no punch back, but with green. If you didn't wear green on St. Patrick's Day, was this a regional thing? Was this not?
We did not participate in that.
All right, well,
That's like Coke versus Pop or something?
Maybe. Well, this is what we did when I was growing up, and I was very nervous that I was going to get it on Sunday because I was not, in fact, wearing green. So I guess I am trying to make up for last time.
Well, I will avoid pinching you.
All right. Well, coming up in today's show, we'll get the latest analysis on the Israel-Gaza conflict from foreign policy expert Trita Parsi. And I have a new radar featuring new reporting about a private White House meeting in which Biden admitted Israel was regularly bombing buildings without solid intelligence that they were legitimate military targets.
But first, the Supreme Court with another bombshell ruling paving the way for Texas's state law known as SB 4 that does allow local judges to order a migrant charged under the state law to return to Mexico. Now, a state court stepped in hours later to block that law. It will be heard by an appellate court today. Democratic Congressman Joaquin Castro had this to say on X: the Supreme Court is allowing Texas to take a trial run of a constitutional crisis. The Texas State Attorney General Ken Paxton also weighed in. Huge win. Texas has defeated the Biden administration's and ACLU's emergency motions at the Supreme Court. Our immigration law, SB 4, is now in effect. As always, it's my honor to defend Texas and its sovereignty and to lead us to victory in court.
The seesaw in SB 4 is indicative of how immigration policy is in disarray. This law, SB 4, put forth by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, has been called an unconstitutional infringement on federal law by the Biden administration. The law allows Texas state officers to carry out arrests once the purview of U.S. Border Patrol exclusively. Texas has been ground zero for the immigration debate taking hold in this nation. Governor Abbott has been ringing the alarm bell for years now. In fact, he began shipping migrants to New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and other blue cities to bring awareness to the issue. Other red state governors followed, overwhelming cities with hundreds of thousands of migrants. Immigration now competes with the economy as the main issue Americans care most about. And policy has become a political battle between the GOP and the Biden administration.
So this is the Supreme Court declining to say that SB 4 can't go into effect while it's still being litigated at the court level. So it is technically in effect. That's what they were hoping. The opponents of the law was hoping the Supreme Court would say, well, it's not in effect until it's settled. They're saying, no, we're not going to hold it up. That was a there's a 6-3 ruling on that, with the conservatives saying, nope, go ahead and enforce it. How or whether it will be enforced is unclear. I was doing some research on it, and it sounds like even the local police are unsure how to go about enforcing it. Will they, because again, federal law says that the feds should be handling it. So are they supposed to hand over these migrants to federal authorities that are not on board with the state having this power? So it seems kind of messy. Obviously, there's a lot of frustration among Republicans about how illegal immigration is being handled, and a desire for state and more local authorities to do something, the perception being they should do something, where the federal government is not doing nearly enough to prevent this crisis. But when it went to the Supreme Court, 10 or 20 years ago over a similar law from Arizona, which I remember well. I think I was living in Arizona at the time.
2012?
Yes. Shortly. Yeah, right, exactly. The Supreme Court ended up saying about that law that, yes, it was unconstitutional because only the federal government has the power to regulate immigration between another country and, the state of Arizona or Texas. Now, Texas has come up with a kind of novel argument here, saying that, well, there's an exception to that in the Constitution if a state is being invaded. Mm-hmm. And the number of immigrants is so great and the effect is an invasion. So that's the kind of clever way they've come up with to justify the law. And we'll have to see what a court says. Yeah,
so in their dissent, the liberal justices, written by Sotomayor, say that this is ripe to cause confusion. Remember, this scuffle seemed to center around the question of whether or not the Texas policy of putting up razor wire in these buoys with razors on them was in conflict with the federal policy, and were federal officers going to be able to remove those wires that they said were getting in the way of them being able to enforce the border? And you can imagine these kinds of conflicts escalating if there is a difference of opinion between whatever Texas as a state decided it needed to do to enforce its policy and whatever the federal government decided it wanted to implement. You can imagine a world where even the federal government said, let's continue building this border wall, as Biden has done, and that federal border wall interferes with some local state intervention that they've put up in its stead. So those are the kind of conflicts that could potentially emerge. But additionally, central to the Arizona case was this question of whether or not enforcement was going to lead to the harassment and infringement of rights of American citizens simply because they looked to a local officer to be an immigrant. Our people who are Latino, our people who are other kind of racial minorities going to be targeted for being pulled over by the cops, for being stopped, arrested, frisked, and harassed simply because someone believes that they look like what an immigrant looks like. And I think that continues to be a concern given that so many Texans are in fact Latinos. It's one of the largest Latino populations in the country. And how are they going to feel if they start to experience this law as a kind of harassment?
Sure. I don't think anyone really wants to give the police more reason to stop regular law-abiding citizens and traffic stops, anything like that. And the details here do matter. I mean, if you want more government enforcement, that's ultimately what you get. You get more security theater, you get more arrests, you get more pat-downs, you get more annoying interactions. We want to minimize the number, I want to minimize at least the number of interactions citizens have with their government, with their police, et cetera. So while immigration is clearly a problem and something needs to be done about it, I don't know if this is the right way to go about it.
There's also this question about deportation authority and our own asylum laws. We have federal asylum laws, but there's a huge backlog, obviously, partly because there's not increased funding. Republicans won't support funding for more immigration law judges to process these claims. But the reality is, do we want to say that a given state has the ability to basically undermine our federal asylum program because it decides it wants to deport various people? So it's weird to think about it, but one of the largest groups of immigrants that we permitted to enter the United States last year were Ukrainian immigrants for obvious reasons. Is there a world where we say we're willing to allow this group of people to have asylum on a federal level, but let's say they weren't Ukrainian, let's say if they were Venezuelan or some other demographic group that is more likely to be the target of the kind of immigration laws, the kind of immigrants that are being targeted in Texas? Can state law decide, oh, no, we're going to subvert our asylum program and deport people out because what we said is that if people cross the border, if people here have an undocumented status, if people here are perceived to be deportable, are we going to have tensions between what the state decides it can do with its authority and what the federal policy is toward various immigrant groups? Right.
Although, I mean, the Ukrainian immigrants are not coming over the border, right?
Right. I mean, that's what I said. But you can imagine a world where
the government has, for all of it, the U.S. government, for all of its history, has exercised authority and discretion over what kinds of immigrants and from what parts of the globe are being allowed to enter the country. So I don't necessarily object to that.
What do you mean?
Was that what you were saying? Maybe I didn't follow.
No, I'm saying that because the federal government has authority over that, what does it mean when a state government starts to usurp that authority? So basically, they have with the Texas law in effect, they have the right to deport people. Like they're claiming authority to deport people without having gone through the asylum vetting process. And what so many people are concerned about, the reason why there's so many undocumented people in many respects in the United States of America is because they're waiting to hear their claims being processed. They're waiting for their asylum claim to be processed. So there's a kind of built-in presumption that among a lot of people who are frustrated by the volume of immigration, that those asylum claims are baseless, they're not going to be granted anyway, and it's allowing people just to live here for years and years and years without getting processed in the first instance, so you might as well deport them, right? A lot of the cases of someone who has committed a crime, a traffic violation, whatever it is, and they say, well, this person was undocumented undocumented. We shouldn't have allowed them to be here. In some of those instances, it's people who weren't just kind of out of the system. It's people who were waiting for their claims to be processed. So if Texas then decides we can just deport people without their claims being processed, that is constructively saying we're throwing out our immigration laws, our federal immigration laws, and deferring instead to whatever local Texas authorities think is the responsible course of action.
Right. I mean, I think that's what many conservatives or many people who oppose illegal immigration, that's exactly what they want. They want the state to have authority to do just that. But whether it actually does as a question of law is something the court is going to decide.
That's a pretty big deal to say a state can basically ignore federal asylum laws. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We used to think that was one of the most important values in our society, that we are, quote unquote, a nation of immigrants. We emblazon all of this pablum on the Statue of Liberty. It didn't used to be pablum, but increasingly it seems like no one really respects that kind of an ethos. That we were a country that many people talking about St. Patrick's Day fled all kinds of famine and horrible political conditions and persecution to come here. And if you had a claim that you were really fleeing certain legally defined kinds of oppression, that America was going to take you in and offer you refuge. And to say that we're going to throw that out if on a state-by-state basis, if individual governors decide that that's what they want to do, that's a significant shift in our national policy that's worth reckoning with.
Well, sure, but I think that is what Republicans or many conservatives want, or they say, well, if you want so many of these immigrants, your state can handle them. We don't like the way they're entering the country over the border is overrunning us, and that's not what we want. And if we're just going to be so accommodating to immigrants, why does it have to be us? I think that's their position.
Well, if we're talking about the policy just to ship them to other states, given Elon Musk's theory that doing so boosts your ability to have more representation in Congress, maybe Democrats shouldn't poo-poo that quite so strongly.
More Rising right after this.